Why is it that some people suddenly become interested in you the moment you stop caring? Why do they text after weeks of silence? Why do they come back after you finally started moving on? If you've ever experienced this, you're not imagining it, and the answer has less to do with manipulation than most people think. Welcome to the Attraction Code, where we decode the hidden psychology behind attraction, obsession, and relationships. By the end of this video, you'll understand why people often become more interested after you've emotionally detached, why distance can increase attraction, and why moving on sometimes triggers feelings that weren't visible before. Let's start with a common misconception. Many people believe that when someone comes back after you've moved on, it's because they suddenly realized your value. Sometimes that's true. But psychology suggests that something deeper is usually happening. Human beings are highly sensitive to changes in emotional availability. When someone knows they have access to you, your attention becomes predictable. And predictable things often fade into the background, not because they aren't valuable, but because the brain adapts. Psychologists call this habituation. The more available something is, the less attention we tend to give it. This happens with objects, experiences, and sometimes even people. When you're constantly available, your presence can become psychologically familiar. But when that availability disappears, something changes. The brain notices the absence. And suddenly, what was once taken for granted becomes psychologically significant. This is where many people make a mistake. They assume the other person is reacting to a strategy. In reality, they're often reacting to a loss. Humans are generally more motivated to avoid losses than to pursue gains. Behavioral psychologists refer to this as loss aversion. Losing something tends to create a stronger emotional reaction than gaining something of equal value. Think about that for a moment. When you're always there, there's nothing to lose. But when you genuinely move on, your attention, energy, and emotional availability are no longer guaranteed. And that's when many people begin to feel your absence. Another factor is uncertainty. Earlier in the relationship, they may have known exactly where they stood. They knew you liked them. They knew you cared. They knew you were emotionally invested. There was certainty. But once you begin moving on, certainty disappears. Now they don't know. Are you seeing someone else? Have you forgotten them? Do you still care? The human brain struggles with unanswered questions. Uncertainty creates mental engagement, and mental engagement often gets mistaken for attraction. This is one reason people sometimes think about someone more after losing access to them. Not because their feelings suddenly appeared, but because uncertainty amplified their attention. There's also another important psychological principle. People value what reflects their identity. When someone knows you want them, it reinforces a certain self-image. It validates them. It confirms something about how they see themselves. But when you stop chasing, that source of validation disappears. Now, the situation feels different. Some people don't miss you. They miss how you made them feel. Others genuinely begin to recognize your value once your presence is no longer guaranteed. And distinguishing between those two situations is extremely important, because not every return is a sign of love. Sometimes it's simply a response to losing validation. This is why emotional detachment is so powerful. Not because it manipulates people, but because it changes the psychological dynamics of the relationship. When your happiness no longer depends on someone else's attention, you become emotionally independent. Ironically, that independence often makes you more attractive. Why? Because confidence and self-sufficiency communicate abundance. Neediness communicates scarcity. And people are naturally drawn toward those who appear emotionally secure. Now let's talk about no contact. Many people misunderstand its purpose. They treat it as a technique to get someone back. But the healthiest purpose of no contact is not to influence another person. It's to regain clarity. It's to stop feeding an emotional cycle that keeps you stuck. And something interesting often happens during that process. The more you focus on rebuilding your own life, the less obsessed you become with theirs. You stop checking. You stop waiting. You stop analyzing every little signal. You begin creating emotional distance. And emotional distance creates perspective. Sometimes the other person returns. Sometimes they don't. But either way, you've regained something far more valuable: your emotional freedom. And here's the paradox. The people who are most likely to attract someone back are usually the people who no longer need them to come back, because their focus has shifted. Their identity has shifted. Their energy has shifted. They're no longer trying to fill an emotional void. They're simply living their life. And that's often when attraction becomes strongest. Not when you're chasing, but when you're genuinely moving forward. So if someone suddenly becomes interested after you've moved on, it doesn't necessarily mean they never cared before. But it often means your absence created awareness that your constant presence never could. Sometimes people recognize value only after they risk losing it. And sometimes moving on isn't what pushes them away. It's what finally reveals how they truly feel. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the Attraction Code for more insights into attraction, attachment, relationships, and the hidden psychology behind why people think, feel, and behave the way they do in love. And if you'd like to continue decoding the psychology of attraction, watch now the next video on your screen.